Marcus Thompson stood in his driveway on a bright July morning, meticulously checking the last items on his travel preparation list. The black Lincoln Navigator gleamed in the early sunlight, packed with everything a family of four would need for their week-long beach getaway. After 15 years of dedication to the FBI's counterterrorism division, he had finally managed to secure an uninterrupted vacation. No on-call status, no emergency protocols, just quality time with his family. Sarah, his wife of 16 years, emerged from their colonial-style home in Alexandria, Virginia, carrying the last of the snack bags. A former civil rights attorney turned law professor, she had orchestrated this entire trip, ensuring every detail was perfect for their children's first real family vacation. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her casual summer dress couldn't hide her infectious excitement. "Marcus, did you double-check the hotel reservations?" Sarah called out, placing the bags in the car's perfectly organized trunk. Her attention to detail matched his own, one of the many reasons they worked so well together. "Yes, honey. The oceanfront suite at Palm Beach Resort is confirmed for 7 nights," Marcus replied, a rare, relaxed smile crossing his usually serious face. At 43, his athletic build and clean-cut appearance commanded respect, even in casual wear. The faint gray at his temples only added to his distinguished presence. 14-year-old Zara bounded down the front steps, her braids swinging, AirPods in one ear. "Dad, please tell me you didn't pack your FBI windbreaker," she teased, knowing her father's habit of always being prepared for work. Despite her playful eye-rolling at her parents' cautiousness, she was privately proud of her father's position, though she'd never admit it to her friends at her prestigious private school. "Very funny, young lady," Marcus chuckled, watching as she climbed into the back seat, already pulling out her iPad. "But you never know when it might come in handy." 10-year-old Marcus Jr., MG to the family, was the last to emerge, clutching his beloved basketball signed by Bradley Beal. His mother had tried to convince him to leave it at home, but Marcus had intervened. He remembered being that age, holding onto things that made him feel secure in new situations. "Come on, sport," Marcus called out, opening the car door for his son. "We've got a long drive ahead of us. Did you bring your travel games?" "Yes, sir," MG replied, his gap-toothed smile brightening his face. "And Zara promised to play 20 questions with me, at least for the first hour." As the family settled into the vehicle, Marcus couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Here they were, the picture of upper-middle-class success. 2 accomplished professionals, 2 bright children, heading off on a well-earned vacation. He'd worked hard to provide this life for them, to give them opportunities he never had growing up in South Philadelphia. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand as he started the engine. "You okay, honey? You've got that serious FBI face on." Marcus relaxed his expression, not realizing he'd slipped into his professional demeanor. "Just thinking about how long it's been since we've done this. Remember our last attempt? When you got called back for that classified operation in Detroit?" Sarah nodded. "This time is different. You promised." "I promised," Marcus affirmed, backing out of the driveway. Their beautiful brick home grew smaller in the rearview mirror as they pulled away. The neighborhood was quiet, houses spaced generously apart, American flags and well-maintained gardens lining the streets. This was their piece of the American dream, hard-earned and well-deserved. As they merged onto I-95 South, Marcus glanced at his family in the rearview mirror. Zara was already lost in her social media world. MG was organizing his travel games, and Sarah was pulling up their carefully planned route on her phone. Everything was perfect. They were finally getting their long-awaited family vacation, and nothing was going to spoil it. Little did Marcus know that in less than 24 hours, their perfect family vacation would become a nightmare that would test everything he believed about justice, race, and the very system he dedicated his life to serving. The Georgia twilight painted the sky in deep purples and oranges as Marcus guided the navigator off Interstate 95. They'd been driving for nearly 8 hours, making good time despite the heavy summer vacation traffic. A green highway sign welcomed them to Millbrook, Georgia, population 3,842. The small town wasn't their planned stopping point, but MG's repeated requests for a bathroom break and Sarah's insistence that they all needed a proper dinner had convinced Marcus to deviate from their carefully plotted route. "Look, there's a diner." Sarah pointed to a weathered building with a neon sign reading Betty's Home Cooking. The parking lot was half full pickup trucks and older model cars clustered near the entrance. At least it's not fast food again. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his shoulders as he pulled into the lot, his FBI training automatically scanning the surroundings. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt, and he noticed how the casual chatter among a group of locals near the entrance died down as they stepped out of their vehicle. "Daddy, I don't like it here," MG whispered, moving closer to his father. The boy's usual energetic demeanor had subdued, his hand clutching his basketball tighter. "It's fine, sport," Marcus assured him, though his own instincts were firing warning signals. He placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him toward the entrance. Sarah fell in step beside them, while Zara trailed slightly behind, her earlier teenage nonchalance replaced with visible unease. The bell of the door chimed as they entered, and the conversation inside the diner dropped to a murmur. Marcus counted 14 patrons, 3 waitresses, and what appeared to be a cook visible through the kitchen window. Every head had turned toward them, some openly staring, others quickly averting their eyes when Marcus met their gaze. "Welcome to Betty's." A middle-aged waitress approached, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "4 of you?" She gathered menus, her gaze lingering on Marcus's expensive watch and Sarah's designer handbag. They were seated in a booth near the back, beside a window that gave Marcus a clear view of their vehicle and the parking lot. Old habits died hard, and 15 years of FBI tactical training had taught him to always position himself with sightlines to exits and potential approach vectors. "We should eat quickly and get back on the road," Sarah murmured, opening her menu but keeping her voice low. Her legal experience had taught her to read rooms just as well as Marcus could. "I don't like the energy in here." Zara slid closer to her mother in the booth, her earlier complaints about family suffocation forgotten. "Mom, did you see how those guys outside were looking at our car?" Marcus had noticed. 3 men had gathered near the navigator, speaking in low tones, and occasionally glancing toward the diner windows. He recognized the body language. He'd seen it countless times in surveillance footage during civil rights investigations. The waitress returned for their drink orders, her pen hovering over her pad. "Y'all must be passing through," she said, the statement carrying an undercurrent of meaning that wasn't lost on any of the Thompsons. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied politely, his voice carrying the measured tone he used during sensitive operations. "Just stopping for dinner on our way to Florida." As they placed their orders, Marcus noticed a patrol car rolling slowly through the parking lot. The officer inside made no attempt to hide his scrutiny of their vehicle. A second patrol car joined the first, parking at an angle that would make it difficult for the navigator to exit its spot. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, having noticed the same thing. Her hand found his under the table, squeezing gently. "Maybe we should just go." Before he could respond, one of the men who'd been eyeing their car entered the diner, making his way to the counter where he engaged in a hushed conversation with another patron while pointing subtly toward their table. MG's basketball slipped from his nervous fingers, bouncing once before Marcus caught it. The sound seemed to echo in the tense atmosphere of the diner, drawing more unwanted attention to their booth. "Finish your waters," Marcus said quietly, his tactical mind already plotting the safest way to extract his family from what was rapidly evolving into a potentially dangerous situation. "We'll get back on the interstate and find somewhere else to eat. But as he watched a third patrol car pull into the lot, Marcus Thompson knew their evening was about to become significantly more complicated. Marcus reached for his wallet, intending to leave enough cash to cover their untouched waters when the diner's door swung open. Two officers entered, their hands resting casually on their duty belts. A stance Marcus recognized as preparation for potential escalation. Behind them, their patrol car's lights silently rotated, casting alternating blue and red shadows through the diner's windows. "Stay calm," Marcus murmured to his family, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, start recording on your phone. Zara, take care of your brother." Years of FBI training kicked in as he assessed the situation. Two officers approaching, at least two more outside, multiple civilian witnesses, no immediate exits except the front door, now partially blocked by law enforcement. "Sir, we're going to need you and your family to step outside," the first officer announced, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Officer Jenkins, according to his nameplate, couldn't have been more than 25. Young, inexperienced, and projecting authority to mask nervousness. Marcus kept his movements deliberate and slow. "Officer Jenkins, I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to understand the reason for this request." His voice carried the measured calm he'd used in countless high-stakes FBI operations. The second officer, older and heavyset with the name Wilson displayed on his chest, stepped forward. "We've had reports of a suspicious vehicle matching your description. There's been a series of high-end car thefts in the area." Sarah's legal training surfaced immediately. "What specific description, officer?" "Our vehicle documentation is current and readily available." "Ma'am, we're not asking for commentary," Wilson snapped, his tone carrying an edge that made MJ flinch. "Step outside now." Marcus noted every detail with professional precision. The officer's increasing agitation, the way Jenkins' thumb had unsnapped his holster, the children's frightened breathing, the dead silence in the diner as other patrons watched the scene unfold. "I'm reaching for my credentials," Marcus announced clearly, using his left hand to slowly extract his FBI badge and identification. "I'm a federal agent with the FBI, and this is my family. We're on vacation, heading to Florida." Jenkins barely glanced at the credentials. "Sir, step out of the vehicle now. Anyone can buy a fake badge on the internet." Sarah's phone was now openly recording, her law professor's knowledge of civil rights violations cataloging every procedural error. "We have not consented to any search or seizure. Under Terry v. Ohio, you need reasonable suspicion of a crime to detain us. A modern vehicle in a known drug corridor, resistant suspects, and now impersonating a federal officer," Wilson listed off, his voice carrying through the silent diner. "That's plenty of reasonable suspicion." Marcus felt his son trembling beside him. MG's basketball had rolled under the table, forgotten in the tension. Zara's face showed a mixture of fear and fury that reminded him so much of Sarah during her civil rights cases. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job." Marcus kept his voice steady, though his heart raced with parental concern rather than personal fear. "I'm going to stand up slowly, and then we can verify my credentials with your dispatcher. You can contact the FBI field office in Atlanta or Assistant Director Jenkins directly." Last warning. Officer Wilson's hand now fully rested on his weapon. "Exit the building now, or we'll consider this active resistance." The diner's other patrons had pressed themselves against the walls, some filming with their phones, others averting their eyes. The waitress who had served them stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot still in hand. Marcus made a rapid series of calculations. He could assert his authority more forcefully, but that risked escalation with armed officers near his children. He could comply entirely, but that meant subjecting his family to further humiliation and potential danger. Or he could try to maintain control of the situation while seemingly cooperating. "We're coming out," he announced, standing slowly. "Sarah, stay with the children. I'll handle this." As they moved toward the door, Marcus caught a glimpse of their reflection in the diner window. A successful black family being herded out like criminals, their perfect vacation dissolving into a nightmare. In that moment, he wasn't Special Agent Thompson of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. He was just another black man trying to protect his family in a small southern town, watching helplessly as his children learned the same harsh lessons he'd hoped they'd never have to face. The patrol car lights continued their silent rotation, painting the scene in alternating waves of blue and red as the Thompson family stepped out into the humid Georgia night. The parking lot had transformed into an impromptu command center, with 4 patrol cars now surrounding the Thompson's Navigator. The humid Georgia air felt thick with tension as additional officers emerged from their vehicles, creating an unnecessarily large police presence for what was supposedly a routine vehicle check. "Hands where we can see them," Officer Wilson barked, his flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness to illuminate each family member in turn. "Ma'am, put the phone down." Sarah kept her phone steady, continuing to record. "I have a constitutional right to document this interaction," she stated firmly, her law professor's authority evident in her voice. "My phone is not a weapon, and I am not interfering with your duties." Marcus watched as Zara discreetly slipped her own phone from her pocket, angling it to capture a different view of the unfolding scene. His daughter's quick thinking made him proud, even as his heart ached that she needed to employ such tactics. "Your vehicle matches the description of one used in a series of burglaries," a new officer announced, approaching from one of the backup units. His nameplate read Captain Brooks, and his arrival seemed to energize the other officers. "We'll need to conduct a search." "Captain," Marcus addressed him directly, maintaining eye contact, "I'm Special Agent Marcus Thompson, FBI Counterterrorism Division. I've already offered to have your dispatcher verify my credentials with the Atlanta field office or Assistant Director Jenkins directly." Brooks's response was to gesture to his officers. "Separate them." Standard procedure when dealing with potential accomplices. "No." MG cried out as an officer approached to guide him away from his parents. "Dad, please." The 10-year-old's basketball, which he'd managed to grab before leaving the diner, slipped from his trembling hands and rolled across the parking lot. Marcus felt his professional composure cracking. "My son stays with his mother," he insisted, his voice carrying the full weight of his federal authority. "There is no probable cause for this level of response, and you're traumatizing a minor." Officer Jenkins moved to retrieve MJ's basketball, holding it like evidence. "Sir, your continued resistance is only making this worse. A real federal agent would understand the need for proper procedure." Sarah's legal mind was cataloging every violation. "This is textbook racial profiling. You have no specific description matching our vehicle, no probable cause for a search, and no justification for separating a minor from his parents. We're filing a formal complaint and pursuing civil action." The growing crowd of onlookers from the diner had their phones out, recording the scene. Marcus noticed several people shaking their heads in dismay, while others seemed to watch with grim satisfaction. "Last warning about the phones," Wilson announced, moving towards Sarah. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation. Either put it away, or we'll consider it interference with police duties." Zara, showing a composure beyond her 14 years, spoke up. "The Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld the right to record law enforcement in public spaces. Terry v. Ohio, Glick v. Cuniff." "Enough." Captain Brooks cut her off. "Jenkins, start the vehicle search. Wilson, separate them for questioning. And somebody deal with these phones." As officers moved to surround them, Marcus made a crucial decision. He reached slowly into his jacket, producing his FBI business card. "Captain Brooks, I'm going to place this on the hood of your patrol car. It has Assistant Director Jenkins' direct line. One call ends this situation." But Brooks ignored the card, instead speaking into his radio. "Dispatch, we're going to need additional units. Subjects are resistant and uncooperative, possibly armed, claiming federal law enforcement status. The situation was spiraling. Marcus could see the fear in MJ's eyes, the controlled fury in Sarah's stance, and the quiet determination in Zara's continued recording. Years of FBI training had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to breach containment. "Sarah," he said quietly, using their agreed-upon tone for emergencies, Protocol 7. She nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding immediately. Protocol 7 was their family's emergency response plan. Stay calm, document everything, contact their emergency list, and above all, stay alive. They'd created it hoping never to use it, but here in a small Georgia town's parking lot, under the harsh glare of police flashlights, the Thompson family was about to need every bit of preparation they'd ever made. "Get on your knees." The command cut through the night air as Captain Brooks drew his weapon, the movement causing other officers to follow suit. In an instant, 6 firearms were trained on the Thompson family, transforming a baseless traffic stop into a potentially lethal confrontation. Marcus's mind raced through his FBI crisis training. His children were in the line of fire. Any sudden movement, any misinterpreted gesture could turn this situation tragic. "Sarah, children, comply," he ordered, his voice steady despite the terror gripping his heart. "Everyone on your knees, hands visible." The rough asphalt bit into their knees as the Thompson family was forced into submission. MJ's quiet sobs cut deeper than any physical pain could. Zara's phone clattered to the ground, still recording as an officer kicked it aside. Sarah managed to press one final button on her phone before letting it drop, sending their prearranged emergency signal to Marcus's FBI supervisor. "You're making the grave mistake," Marcus stated, maintaining his professional tone even as Officer Jenkins roughly pulled his hands behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into his wrists. "I am a federal agent, and you are assaulting a law enforcement officer." "A real Fed wouldn't be driving through here this late," Brooks sneered, watching as his officers moved to handcuff Sarah. "Probably got that fake badge from the same place you got that fancy SUV." Sarah's voice carried across the parking lot, clear and controlled. "For the record, you are arresting a senior FBI agent and a law professor without probable cause. Every second of this is being recorded and transmitted." The growing crowd of onlookers had swelled, their phone cameras capturing every moment. Some local teenagers were streaming the incident live on social media, ensuring that what was happening in the small Georgia town wouldn't stay hidden. "Mommy." MJ's cry pierced the night as an officer moved to separate him from Sarah. "Please don't take my mommy." Marcus had witnessed countless arrests in his career, had overseen operations that took down dangerous criminals, but nothing had prepared him for watching his 10-year-old son beg for his mother while staring down the barrels of police weapons. "The children stay with me," Sarah demanded, her voice carrying the authority of countless courtroom battles. "You have no grounds to separate minors from their guardian. This is already a massive civil rights violation." Officer Jenkins, perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation, hesitated. "Captain, maybe we should wait for verification from—" "Put them all in separate cars," Brooks interrupted. "Call social services for the minors. We'll sort this out at the station." Zara, showing remarkable presence of mind, began reciting into the still recording phones. "This is Zara Thompson, age 14. The time is 9:47 p.m. We're being illegally detained by the Millbrook Police Department. They're separating our family without cause and refusing to verify my father's FBI credentials." "Shut her up," Brooks ordered, but the damage was done. Her clear, precise documentation of events had been broadcast to dozens of phones and live streams. As officers moved to lift Marcus from his knees, he locked eyes with each family member in turn. To Sarah, a look that conveyed their years of preparation for racism they'd hoped their children would never face. To Zara, a nod of pride at her composed resistance. To MJ, a gentle smile meant to reassure, even as tears streamed down his son's face. "This ends tonight," Marcus stated with quiet certainty, allowing himself to be led toward a patrol car. "Every officer involved in this arrest is going to face federal civil rights charges." Captain Brooks leaned in close as he opened the patrol car door. "Welcome to Georgia, Agent Thompson. Let's see how the FBI badge holds up in county lockup." As the door slammed shut, Marcus watched through the window as his family was forcibly separated, each led to different patrol cars. In 15 years of federal service, he'd helped protect America from numerous threats. But here, in a small Georgia town, he couldn't protect his own children from the very system he'd sworn to serve. The patrol car's interior felt suffocating as Marcus began his tactical count. 20 minutes until his supervisor would notice the emergency signal. 30 minutes until the FBI's Atlanta field office could mobilize. 45 minutes until the small-town department would learn the true meaning of federal intervention. For the Thompson family, the longest night of their lives was just beginning. The Millbrook police station buzzed with unusual activity for a Thursday night. Marcus sat handcuffed to a wooden chair in the main booking area, his FBI credentials and personal belongings confiscated, watching the minute hand on the wall clock tick past midnight. He'd been separated from his family for over 2 hours, but his training helped him maintain his composure. He knew what was coming. Captain Brooks sat at his desk, filling out arrest paperwork with deliberate slowness, occasionally shooting smug glances in Marcus's direction. The other officers milled about, their earlier bravado beginning to show cracks as time passed without being able to find any evidence supporting their claims about stolen vehicles. "Sir," Officer Jenkins approached Brooks, his young face showing the first signs of worry. The FBI number on his credentials. "I think we should." The station's front door burst open. "Federal agents. Everyone stand down." Assistant Director Catherine Jenkins strode in, flanked by 6 FBI agents in tactical gear and 4 Georgia State Police officers. Her silver hair and pressed suit contrasted sharply with the local officers' disheveled appearances after their long night of civil rights violations. "I'm looking for Special Agent Marcus Thompson," she announced, her voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. "And someone better have a damn good explanation for why one of my top agents and his family are being held without cause." The transformation in the room was immediate. Captain Brooks stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. Officer Jenkins's face drained of color as he recognized the FBI assistant director from her photos and federal law enforcement bulletins. "Release him immediately," Jenkins ordered, and 2 state officers moved to unlock Marcus's handcuffs. "Where is his family?" "Director Jenkins," Marcus spoke formally, rubbing his wrists as he stood. "They've separated my wife and children. My son is only 10 years old." Jenkins's expression hardened. "Get them. Now." The local officers scrambled to comply. Within minutes, Sarah was escorted in from an interrogation room, her professional demeanor intact despite the ordeal. Zara followed, head held high, still carrying the quiet dignity that had marked her resistance. Finally, MG appeared, running straight into his father's arms as soon as he was released. "Daddy," he sobbed, clinging to Marcus. "I was so scared." Sarah moved to embrace them both while Zara joined the family circle. All 4 Thompsons holding each other as the federal agents secured the station and began collecting evidence. "Captain Brooks," Jenkins's voice cut through the chaos, "your department is now under federal investigation for civil rights violations, abuse of power, and unlawful detention of a federal agent. I strongly suggest you contact your union representative and a good lawyer." Brooks, his earlier arrogance evaporated, stammered, "We had reports of suspicious." "Save it for your deposition," Jenkins interrupted. "We've reviewed the cell phone footage, body cam videos, and social media streams. Your suspicious vehicle report never existed, did it?" Officer Jenkins stepped forward, his young face showing genuine remorse. "Ma'am, I'd like to make a formal statement about departmental practices regarding traffic stops and racial profiling. Sarah, still holding MJ close, spoke up. I've already contacted the ACLU. They're very interested in the pattern of stops in this jurisdiction. Assistant Director Jenkins nodded to her agents, who began collecting phones, body cameras, and computer hard drives. We'll need all departmental records for the past 5 years. Traffic stops, arrests, complaints, everything. Marcus watched the scene unfold, his FBI training allowing him to appreciate the thoroughness of the federal response, while his father's heart still raced at how close they'd come to tragedy. He looked down at MJ, who had finally stopped trembling. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" his son whispered. "No, son," Marcus assured him, running a hand over MJ's hair. "We did everything right. Sometimes standing up for what's right means facing people who do wrong. But justice always comes through in the end." Sarah squeezed her husband's hand, sharing a look that contained volumes, relief, anger, determination, and the shared knowledge that their children had lost something precious tonight. Their innocence about what it meant to be black in America, even when your father was an FBI agent. Agent Thompson, Assistant Director Jenkins approached the family. "A trauma counselor is on the way for the children, and we've secured rooms at the Embassy Suites in Atlanta. We'll need your formal statement, but that can wait until morning." The local officers stood in shocked silence, watching as their small-town power play transformed into a career-ending federal investigation. Outside, more FBI vehicles arrived, their lights painting the station walls in steady, professional blue, so different from the aggressive flashing that had started this nightmare just hours before. The truth had emerged, but for the Thompson family, its cost had been far too high. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Atlanta Embassy Suites hotel room as Marcus watched his son finally drift into exhausted sleep. MG had refused to let go of his father's hand all night, the trauma of their separation still fresh. The boys' basketball, retrieved from the Millbrook Police Department's evidence room, lay close to his pillow like a protective talisman. Sarah sat at the room's desk, her laptop open to a document already spanning several pages. She'd been up all night, her legal training converting their ordeal into a comprehensive civil rights complaint. The local news played silently on the TV behind her, showing cell phone footage of their arrest on a continuous loop. "They've suspended Brooks and Wilson," she announced, reading from her phone. "Jenkins has agreed to testify about departmental practices. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is launching a full investigation." Zara, curled up in an armchair with her own laptop, looked up. "Dad, our video has over 2 million views. #ThompsonFamily is trending. People are sharing stories about similar experiences in small towns across Georgia." Marcus nodded, his professional mind already cataloging how this incident would reshape law enforcement practices, while his father's heart ached at the cost to his family. The sound of his phone buzzing interrupted his thoughts. "Thompson," he answered quietly, trying not to wake MJ. "Marcus," Assistant Director Jenkins's voice came through. "The press is gathering at the field office. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they all want statements. Your family's ordeal has become the catalyst for a larger conversation about law enforcement accountability." Sarah moved to sit beside Marcus, taking his free hand. She could hear both sides of the conversation, her years as his partner making her attuned to the weight of such moments. "We've uncovered 5 years of documented racial profiling in Millbrook," Jenkins continued. "Traffic stop data, arrest records, civilian complaints, all showing a clear pattern. Your case broke it open, but this goes deeper than one night or one family." "What are our next steps?" Marcus asked, his FBI training automatically seeking tactical solutions even as he watched his son's troubled sleep. "The Department of Justice is sending a team. They want to use this case to establish new guidelines for small-town police departments. Sarah's video evidence is irrefutable, and Zara's documentation was textbook perfect." Marcus felt a surge of pride through his exhaustion. His daughter had shown remarkable presence of mind, turning her phone into a weapon of truth against injustice. There's something else, Jenkins added. The Georgia NAACP wants to honor your family at their next ceremony. They believe your story, an FBI agent and law professor subjected to blatant profiling, might finally force people to acknowledge how deep this problem runs. Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand, her legal mind already seeing the possibilities. We can use this, Marcus, not for us, but for every family who didn't have FBI credentials or law degrees to protect them. A soft knock at the door made them all turn. Zara answered it, admitting a hotel staff member with a cart of breakfast and a stack of newspapers. The headlines told the story. FBI FAMILY racially PROFILED in Georgia. Police Department under federal investigation. VIRAL VIDEO exposes CMMAL Taiwan in USIC. As the staff member left, Marcus noticed his hands shaking slightly as he poured coffee. The professional distance he'd maintained through years of FBI operations had crumbled when it was his own children facing down police weapons. "Dad," Zara said softly, showing him her phone. "People are organizing protests in Millbrook. They're calling for complete departmental reform. This is bigger than us now." MJ stirred in his sleep, whimpering slightly. Marcus moved to comfort him, and as he did, Sarah spoke with quiet determination. "We're filing the lawsuit," she declared. "Not for compensation, but for change. Mandatory bias training, civilian oversight boards, body camera requirements, independent review of traffic stop patterns. Everything we've advocated for in theory will demand in practice." Marcus looked at his family, his brilliant wife documenting injustice, his brave daughter amplifying truth, his innocent son carrying new scars, and made a decision. "Call Jenkins back," he told Sarah. "Tell her we're ready to make a statement. The nation needs to understand. If this can happen to an FBI agent's family, it can happen to anyone. And it has to stop." Outside their hotel window, Atlanta buzzed with media vehicles and gathering crowds. Their interrupted vacation had transformed into something far more significant. A moment of national reckoning with the reality of racial profiling in America. For the Thompson family, the path forward was clear. Their trauma would become testimony, their ordeal would drive reform, and their truth would demand change. Part 8. The response. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium in the FBI's Atlanta field office, facing a wall of cameras and reporters. Sarah sat in the front row, flanked by their children, all of them dressed with the careful dignity that black families had long known to be necessary armor. "What happened to my family in Millbrook wasn't an isolated incident," Marcus began, his measured FBI tone carrying the weight of both professional authority and personal pain. "It was a symptom of a systemic problem that has plagued small towns and big cities across our nation. The only unusual aspect was that this time, they chose the wrong family to profile." The room fell silent as Marcus shared their story. He described MJ's tears, Zara's composure, Sarah's quick thinking, and his own helplessness. A federal agent watching his children learn the harsh realities of being black in America. In the 2 weeks since their ordeal, the response had grown beyond anything they could have anticipated. Sarah's legal team had uncovered hundreds of similar incidents in Millbrook and surrounding counties. The department's own records reveal a pattern of discriminatory stops that couldn't be explained away. The lawsuit we're filing today, Sarah stepped up to explain, her law professor's precision giving weight to each word, isn't about monetary damages. It's about structural change. We're demanding. She outlined the requirements. Mandatory bias training with yearly renewal, civilian oversight boards with real power, body camera requirements with penalties for non-compliance, regular external audits of traffic stop patterns, and immediate suspension for officers who show patterns of discriminatory behavior. Zara, who had become something of a social media icon for her composed documentation of the incident, had started a youth advocacy group called Record and Remember. Their first meeting had drawn hundreds of teenagers, all learning their rights and proper documentation procedures. Young people need to understand both their rights and their power, Zara told a teen magazine reporter after the press conference. My phone became a tool for justice that night. Every one of us carries that same power. The changes had already begun. Captain Brooks and Officer Wilson had been terminated, facing criminal charges for civil rights violations. Officer Jenkins, the young officer who'd shown remorse, was cooperating with federal investigators, revealing years of departmental practices that had encouraged profiling. But the most profound changes were personal. MG had started seeing a trauma counselor, working through the fear that still woke him at night. His basketball team had worn black armbands in solidarity, and his coach, a white man who'd never considered himself particularly political, had organized a community discussion about racial profiling. The hardest part, Marcus confided to Assistant Director Jenkins after the press conference, is knowing that our privilege as educated professionals probably saved our lives that night. How many other families weren't so fortunate? The FBI had launched a task force headed by Marcus to investigate similar patterns in small-town departments across the Southeast. Sarah had taken a sabbatical from teaching to work full-time on police reform legislation, her students volunteering as researchers. Local churches and community organizations in Millbrook had formed a coalition, demanding accountability and change. The town council, facing national scrutiny and legal pressure, had voted unanimously to implement reforms even before the lawsuit was settled. Sometimes, Sarah told a reporter from the Washington Post, it takes seeing injustice happen to people society considers above suspicion to force acknowledgement of what marginalized communities have been saying for decades. The family's vacation photos, never taken, had been replaced by different images. MJ speaking to his class about courage, Zora training other teens in digital documentation, Sarah testifying before state legislators, Marcus working with reform-minded police chiefs to implement new protocols. As they left the press conference, a young black officer stopped Marcus. "Sir," he said quietly, "my department's starting bias training next week because of what happened to your family. We're finally having the conversations we should have had years ago." Marcus looked at his family, stronger now, though still healing, and saw in their eyes the same determination that had carried generations of civil rights defenders. Their ordeal had become a catalyst, their pain transformed into purpose. "Change happens," he told the young officer, "when good people refuse to let injustice rest in shadows. We just happened to be the family that turned on the lights." Outside, protesters gathered peacefully, their signs demanding justice for all families and no more Millbrooks. The Thompson family's interrupted vacation had launched a movement, and its waves of change were still spreading. 6 months after that fateful night in Millbrook, the Thompson family gathered in their Alexandria living room, watching a live stream of the Georgia State Legislature. Sarah sat forward in her chair, gripping Marcus's hand as the votes were tallied for the Thompson family law, comprehensive police reform legislation that would reshape law enforcement practices across the state. "The final vote is 142 to 37, the speaker announced. The bill passes. MJ, who had been bouncing his basketball nervously throughout the count, let it drop as he rushed to hug his parents. At 11 now, his birthday celebration the previous week had been markedly different from past years. Instead of just family and friends, civil rights leaders and reform advocates had attended, celebrating not just his growing up, but his role in changing history. "This is really happening," Zara said softly, looking up from her laptop where she'd been moderating her Record and Remember youth advocacy group's national forum. The organization had grown to over 50,000 members across the country, with chapters in every state training young people about their rights and proper documentation of police interactions. The legislation mandated sweeping changes. Every police department in Georgia would now require comprehensive bias training, civilian oversight boards, and transparent recording of all civilian interactions. Traffic stop data would be publicly accessible, and departments showing patterns of discrimination would face automatic federal review. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Assistant Director Jenkins. Change starts somewhere. Your family made it start here. The transformation in Millbrook had been profound. The new police chief, an African-American woman with 20 years of community policing experience, had completely restructured the department. Officer Jenkins, after providing crucial testimony about systemic racism in the old department, had been retained and reassigned to lead youth outreach programs. Remember when we just wanted a beach vacation? Sarah mused, pulling up photos on her phone. The images told their story: the press conferences, the legislative hearings, the community meetings, and finally, the family portrait they'd taken on the steps of the Georgia State Capitol after testifying for the bill. But it was the personal changes that meant the most. MJ no longer flinched when police cars passed their house. His school counselor had noted how he'd started speaking up in class again, sharing their family's story during discussions about civil rights and social justice. Zara had been accepted early to Georgetown Law School's pre-college summer program. Her application essay that night in Millbrook had earned her a full scholarship, with the dean noting that her combination of composure under pressure and commitment to systematic change embodied the future of legal advocacy. "Dad," MJ asked, breaking into Marcus's thoughts, "can we try going to the beach again?" The question hung in the air for a moment. They hadn't attempted another family vacation since that night, all of them too busy with their advocacy work and healing process. But maybe it was time. "You know what? Sport." Marcus smiled. "I think we're ready." Sarah pulled up her calendar. "The Civil Rights Commission meeting in Miami is next month. We could add a few days, make it a working vacation. I can run a record and remember training session on the beach." Zara added, "Already planning. Some of our Florida chapters have been asking for in-person workshops." The doorbell interrupted their planning. On their doorstep stood a delivery man with a large package from the Georgia State Legislature. Inside, they found the ceremonial pen used to sign the Thompson family law, mounted alongside a plaque that read, "Sometimes change comes from courage, sometimes from tragedy, but lasting change comes from turning both into action." With gratitude to the Thompson family, whose strength transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for justice. Marcus looked at his family, Sarah, whose legal brilliance had shaped reform into reality; Zara, whose youthful determination had inspired a generation; and MJ, whose innocence lost had sparked a nation's conscience, and saw not victims of that terrible night, but architects of the change it had spawned. "The beach sounds perfect," he said, pulling them all into a hug. "But this time, we're taking the coastal route through major cities." They all laughed, the sound carrying the warmth of healing and hope. Their interrupted vacation had launched an unintended journey, one that had taken them not to sandy shores, but to the front lines of social change. And while they would finally get their beach trip, they had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that one family's courage could help bend the long arc of history a little closer toward justice. Outside their window, the sun set on another day in Alexandria, Virginia, but across Georgia and beyond, the changes they had set in motion were just beginning to dawn.